Welcome to Average Joe's Pool. Today we have another in our series of pool cue review videos. And for this video, Bunjee Billiards have been kind enough to supply us with this for review, and this is the original break and jump cue by Bunjee. So first of all, what do we know about the Bunjee brand? Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information available online about the history of the Bunjee brand, but they've definitely been around for a few years. And Bunjee claim to be the original inventors of the butterfly handle on dedicated jump cues, which is that little flare you sometimes get on the butt end of the jump cue. Now, whether there's any truth to that rumour or not, I really don't know. I can't verify it, but if so, that's pretty cool. However, what we definitely do know about Bunjee Billiards is that they are owned and operated by FCI Billiards. And unfortunately, these cues are not currently widely available. You can't actually buy these on platforms such as Amazon. Currently, there's only two places you can buy these from, either from the Bunjee Billiards website, bunjeebilliards.com, or direct from fcibilliards.com. And it's worth noting, as you may well have guessed because of the name, Bunjee specialises solely in jump and, as we have here, break and jump cues. And this particular cue comes with several options available. The first of which would be a natural maple finish, and that comes with or without the wrap. And also there's an ebony one that comes again with or without the wrap. And those four options are all the same price. They come in at $119. And the version that we have here is slightly different. This is called the 4-point original break and jump cue, finished in black. And this version has a slightly more modern look to it, complete with the contrasting stripes on the points, and also the slightly more modern logo compared to the two wood variants. And we do believe that this version is identical in design to both the maple and ebony versions. It's just a slight cosmetic update to make the cue look more modern. And this variation comes in a little bit more expensive. This one is $140. And with regards to options on this particular cue, there are 7 weight options available if you're buying from fcibilliards.com. This comes in 18 through to 21 ounces, including half-ounce increments. So now we know a little bit more about our original break and jump cue. Let's take a look at some of the specifications. So first of all, packaging, and the Bunjee cue comes packaged in a fairly standard transparent poly bag. Nothing exciting to report there. And with regards to design, they've definitely gone for a very modern look. This cue is finished in a solid black paint. And for the points on this cue, what they've done is finished in yellow and actually zigzags itself backwards and forwards all the way around the cue. And in addition to that, we also have the Bunjee logo here on the butt, and on the other side of the butt we have their little icon. And with regards to joints, what we have on this cue, these are called turbo locks, and it's around 2.5 turns to fully lock this in place. And of course, being a break and jump cue, we also have a second joint right here, and that has the identical pin in it as well, so that's also turbo lock. And moving on to the shaft is made from a Canadian hard rock maple. And with regards to the profile on this shaft, it definitely does have a taper. However, it's still quite a chunky shaft, as you would expect from a break and jump cue. And for the ferrule here, this is finished in white, and the length is 10.4 millimeters. And with regards to the tip, what we have here is the standard Bunjee tip, which is phenolic. And unfortunately, we don't have any real specifications that have been passed on to us with regards to this cue, so we don't know what diameter the tip should be. We assume 13 millimeters. And when we measured this in, it came in just a touch over 13.23 millimeters. And for the finish on the shaft here, the last couple of inches there are varnished, as to be expected, with a nice straight line. And also we definitely have some kind of seal on the shaft there as well. It's got a nice smooth feel. And when it comes to the overall length of the cue, the whole cue measured in at 58.5 inches. However, if you take away from that the butt cap and the tip, what you have there is pretty much bang on 58. and that comprises of a full butt length, including butt cap, of 29 1/4 inches. And breaking that down further, the jump handle section of that came in at 12 inches, leaving 17 1/4 inches for the brake handle section. And for the shaft length, this came in at 29 3/16 inches. So next up, let's take a quick look at the diameters for our original brake and jump cue. And the diameter on our butt end was 32.3 millimeters. And at the joint, the diameter was 21.45 millimeters. And the diameter, if you're looking at just the end of the jump handle, was 26.85 millimeters. Next, looking at weight. Now, we weren't sure what weight we'd actually been sent by Bunjee. Now, this cue weighed in at 19.59 ounces, so we assume that we've been sent a 19.5. And taking a look inside the cue, removing the rubber butt cap, we did have a weight inside the handle. And the weight itself is actually quite a large weight. It was a 4-ounce weight, which weighed in at 3.923 ounces. And breaking that weight down into sections, on the brake handle section here, we had 10.64 ounces. And our jump handle section weighed in at 4.52 ounces. Leaving our shaft, and that weighed in at 4.42 ounces. So if you're using the cue in its jump form, using just the shaft and the jump handle, we have a weight of 8.945 ounces. Next, looking at the centre of balance, and our Bunjee cue came in at 18 3/16 from the butt cap. So this is definitely a slightly rear heavy cue, even for a brake and jump cue. And we did also check the centre of balance when using it in just its jump cue form, and that came in at 14 9/16 inches. So now we know exactly what we've got here. Let's jump into the technical tests.
But in the beginning, I didn't know whose side you were on.
We'll now test the Bunjee for straightness, and in addition to a basic visual inspection, we'll conduct 3 straightness tests. And first up, the simple table roll test. And as we can see, the Bunjee passes this easy test with flying colours, showing no issues at all with its roll. But this test is pretty easy, so let's step it up for test number 2, the rail roll test. And for this test, we roll the cue along the solid edge of the rail and watch the tip for wobble. And this time we can see that we definitely do have a small amount of wobble, so we know that we're not 100% straight and true. So let's throw down the gauntlet with the toughest straightness test in the West and get the cue onto the cue rollers. And now we can very clearly see the wobble. But we do have to remember that for a brake and jump cue, we are still definitely towards the lower end of the price spectrum. And interestingly, when we remove the end handle and put the cue into its shorter jump cue form, we can still have a very similar amount of wobble. So we'd definitely like to have seen a touch better here, but it's nothing outrageous. Perfection on a budget is a very rare thing indeed. So we're happy to award the Bunjee an average 2.5 stars out of 5 for straightness. For our performance test, we'll be testing the Bunjee for 2 deflection tests, squirt and natural pivot length, as well as testing the spin capability using masse jump shots, and also testing for jump distance. And finally, play testing. Let's make a start with squirt. This test is conducted over a length of 75 inches, which is the distance from the head spot to the rear rail on a 9-foot table. And we'll be using maximum parallel English coupled with a hard shot. And we'll repeat the test for a minimum of 10 shots on each side to ensure an accurate average. Now, it should be noted that deflection tests are less relevant when it comes to brake and jump cues compared to playing cues, because generally you'll not be using the cue to apply the same amount of spin. But it's always interesting to know just for reference, so let's take a look. And the Bunjee came in with an average of 3.5 inches, which is considerably below average. But we do expect these lower figures from a brake and jump cue. So no real surprises there, and an acceptable result considering what we're using and its price point. Now we'll test the natural pivot length. And this test is repeated at increasing bridge lengths until we find the maximum, which is then duplicated 3 times on both sides to ensure accuracy. And for this test, the longer the length, then the lower the cue's deflection, so longer is definitely better. And the bungee came in with a slightly disappointing 10 3/4 inches. We did expect a little better here, but again we must remember that this test is not the most relevant for break and jump cues, as spin is generally not their primary function. So let's suck it up and move on. Next up, let's test the level of spin that's possible when using the cue for masse jump shots. And for this test we set up reference balls against the 3 rear rail sights. And we shoot from the head spots with a blocker ball in place to ensure that the ball jumps straight. And then we can watch how much spin we were able to produce as the ball lands and the spin takes control. And we found that the bungee excelled at this test. Not only were we able to generate good amounts of spin, but the same level of spin could be applied confidently and consistently. And we also found that you can push the strike point on the cue ball to the extremes of left and right, and it still holds strong, very often beyond what we're certain should cause a miscue. We found that it's actually pretty difficult to get this cue to miscue. Instead, it simply just does the shot regardless of how hard you push it. But the trade-off is that the cue does demand to be pushed hard. Lazy jump shots with this bungee cue simply will not be rewarded. For our next test, we're going to have some fun and see how many balls we can jump using the bungee to help us get a feel for how dynamic the cue is, in what we lovingly refer to as our Evel Knievel test. And for this test, we simply start with 1 object ball and keep adding to it ball by ball until we can jump no further. And for this test, air bridges are not permitted, and so the fingers of the bridge hand remain on the table for the shot. And once again, the bungee performed well. In fact, it seemed particularly well suited to this test, as the cue seems to come alive when you push it hard. And with the bungee break and jump, we managed to clear 21 balls, which equals our previous record, which was set using the much more expensive Stinger by McDermott. And this also beat Bungee's own dedicated jump cue by 1 ball. And so, although this test does not have all that much relevance in real-life jumping situations, it does allow us to get a feel for how dynamic and efficient jump cues are compared to one another. And it's great to see the bungee excelling in this test.
Why would spiders suddenly turn aggressive?
So next we'll be moving on to play testing, and if you've seen any of our reviews here at Average Joe's Pool before, you'll know that we give all products a minimum of 5 hours use on the table to ensure we give them a fair and thorough review. So it's time to break some balls and jump some balls. Let's do it. So we've now been playing around with the bungee break and jump cue for a considerable amount of time. So what are our thoughts with regards to performance. Now for me, the major negative was using this as a jump cue. And when I initially did my first few jump shots with this cue, I really didn't like it very much at all. I felt that the cue felt a little bit stiff and perhaps a little bit lifeless, and it really just didn't feel very dynamic. And it just felt like the cue didn't really give very much feedback. And so I was never really confident that the cue would actually perform how I wanted it to. I'm quite thankful that we had the time to spend on this cue because I did put quite a few hours specifically into jump shots. And what I found with this cue is it's not a very forgiving cue. It does require quite a lot of user input. But once you get that right, this thing really comes alive. Now when I say user input, what I mean is you've actually got to press this cue fairly hard to get the best out of it. And some cues are really good at giving you feedback, so you know exactly what that shot's likely to do as soon as you've struck the cue ball. On our Bunjee here, we definitely don't get a massive amount of feedback from the cue. But once you've got your head around the feel of this cue, this is a cue that you really can push to extremes. And it's quite surprising how little this cue will let you down. We also played around with a few height shots as well, jumping over piles of balls just to see what it could do. And again, it managed this with relative ease. And most importantly, virtually, again, no miscues. So we've talked about using this cue as a jump cue, but what about when you're using it for its other purpose and using it for braking? Now when you're using this for brakes, you do tend to get a little bit more feedback than you do when you're using it as a jump cue. And this cue is definitely capable of delivering a decent amount of power, and it really does have a nice pop to it. Now, as tends to be the case with all brake and jump cues, the braking ability on this is probably not as good as it would be on a 100% dedicated brake cue. Because when it comes to brake and jump cues, of course, you've got a cue that's designed to do two very different jobs. But as a brake cue, it's definitely a very solid option. And so with the Bunjee, we have a surprisingly good level of performance. But it does demand to be worked hard to achieve it in exchange. So we'll award it a very solid 4 stars out of 5 for performance.
Turn around, you overage degenerate, and we'll bump heads.
So moving on to features, what exactly do we have on our Bunjee brake and jump? And the first thing to say when it comes to features is this cue really doesn't have a massive amount of them. As you can see, it is a fairly simple and almost a slightly plain design. But that design is very clean and precise, and they've definitely gone for quite a modern, sporty look. So a nice feature on this cue is the joint here. This features the turbo lock, which is a quick release joint. So a couple of turns and it's away. And also it's finished quite well because when this is in place, all you can see is just the faintest of lines, so that almost kind of hides the fact that what we have here is a brake and jump. Additionally, it's also nice to have that same joint type here where it connects to the shaft as well. Often on brake and jump cues you'll have a more standard joint, a non-quick release joint, where the shaft connects to the forearm here, but then you have a quick release down here. This has quick release on both. And also the shaft here has got a very nice profile to it. It's tapered down enough so it still feels like quite a high precision cue. But we do still have a decent amount of weight and chunk in there, which is precisely what you need for the job that this cue is intended to do. Another nice feature is the ferrule. The ferrule is fairly short, as you can see here, and that's quite nice, gives it a slightly more expensive look to it. So when it comes to features, the Bunjee is pretty well stacked, considering we're still at the lower end of the market with its $140 price tag. So we'll award a decent 3.5 stars out of 5 for features. So now let's talk about quality. When it comes to the Bunjee brake and jump, the quality overall is very good. The transitions that we have across all of our joints and components, very, very smooth, including the ferrule through to the tip. Everything is super smooth. You can't kind of catch a nail on it. It feels exactly as you would hope that it would. And with regards to the printed design that we have on the cue here, it's a very simple kind of zigzag point design. However, it's very, very well done. The points are nice and sharp and crisp, and there is no trace of where the overlap on this pattern might be as it comes around the cue. All of these points are absolutely spot on. And for the shaft here, it has been lightly sealed and it's lovely and smooth, and you can feel absolutely no imperfections. So it might be quite a plain cue, but it's definitely very, very well formed. However, the only real issue that we had with this from a quality perspective is this cue does have a slight imbalance when it's in its full break cue form. And what we found is when you put this cue on the table and you roll it back gently, backwards and forwards, it does have a slight weight imbalance. It's like the weight isn't quite centered properly. Now this does only affect this cue when it's in its break cue form, not the jump cue form. And it must be said, when you're actually breaking with this cue, it didn't notice any imbalance in it at all. But of course it is annoying that we do have this slight imbalance. When we're talking quality, the Bunjee is generally excellent for a cue at this price. But we did unfortunately have an imbalance in our review cue. So we'll award 3 stars out of 5 for quality. So what about value for money? At $140, what else is out there when it comes to break and jump cues? Well, the Bunjee certainly does have stiff competition, mainly from the heavy hitter series by Rage and the cheaper offerings by Action, both coming in a little cheaper than the Bunjee at around $120, as well as players starting at around $145. But what we have here is a cue that definitely deserves to stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the best in this category. It's a cue that demands to be worked hard for best results, but in exchange it's surprisingly capable. So we'll score it 3.5 stars out of 5 for value. If your budget is tight, then the Bunjee is definitely worthy of consideration. And so, with our scoring now completed, we can take a look at the average from across our 5 test categories and get our official Average Joe's rating. And the Bunjee Break and Jump brings it on home with a respectable 3.4 stars. What we have here with the Bunjee is not perfect, but the combination of price coupled with the unusually strong performance when pushed hard makes this a great choice for those wanting something capable without breaking the bank. And so there we have it. That concludes our review of the Bunjee Original Break and Jump cue. A cue that initially I hated, but I'm really glad that I put that time investment into it, because this thing really can deliver. Now, if you are interested in buying a Bunjee cue, remember they're not currently available to buy on Amazon. So your options if you do want to buy one of these is to go to Bunjee's official website, which is bunjeebilliards.com, or alternatively go directly to the owner of Bunjee, fcibilliards.com. And as usual, we will add links to both of those websites into the video description below for you. So thank you very much for watching. We hope it's been informative or enjoyable for you. And if it has, we always ask before you leave us, can you please take 1 second out of your busy schedule just to please be sure to at least hit that like button for us. Likewise, whilst you're there, also please consider hitting that subscribe button. We've got loads more great pool related videos on our channel just waiting for you to check out. So thank you once again. Carpe diem, seize the day, boys. Make your lives extraordinary.
But in life, all is not swordplay.